on the research, one of the really interesting things that came through was 37% of the respondents said they've witnessed AI projects failing or causing harm. So about a third of people have witnessed AI causing harm in some way in the organization.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Undocked. I'm Raal Harris.
And I'm Nick Chubb.
How you doing, Nick? Good to see you.
I'm good. I've just come off a Thetius research launch, so I'm buzzing, and that's why I've dressed up.
Yeah, just noticing that people may feel that we've done some sort of head swap. Normally I'm in a white shirt and you're in a t-shirt. Slowly morphing into each other. Spending too much time together. But yes, tell us more, because this is quite exciting. I must admit, I missed it. I didn't tune in.
I'll take that deeply personally. Yeah, it's a report that was commissioned by Marcura, and the idea kind of came about 6 months ago. They were kind of thinking, look, everyone's getting really excited by AI, and sort of rightly so. By the way, last week I promised we wouldn't talk about AI. I think this week we will just talk about AI based on everything that I've seen over the last few days. Everyone's getting really excited about AI, but there's loads of hype. And what we tried to do is kind of get under the skin of where is AI actually being used in the maritime industry, and how do people feel about it? Are people excited about it, scared about it? So we did a massive survey. We did, it was about 150 people responded. I might misquote the figures slightly, but it was about 30% ship owners, about 50% vendors, sort of technology vendors, and then 20% of kind of miscellaneous regulators, that sort of stuff. And then, something like 30% C-suite, 20% senior management, and then going on down to the organization outside of that. So it's I'd like to think it's fairly reflective of where senior decision makers are at across the industry. I think one of the interesting things that comes out of it is there's lots of excitement from senior leaders, but possibly the actual reality of implementing this stuff that's going to fall more on the kind of ops people is possibly a little bit more difficult. So that's one of the kind of first things that came out of the report from that I thought was really interesting. Shall I give you some stats?
Yeah, that would be great. We always love statistics.
We do.
They're hard to argue with, you see. That's the main thing.
So 81% of respondents said that they are running AI pilots in their organizations. Which we normally view technology implementation on something like a 10-year horizon. And there's normally like a very small number of forward-leaning organizations that really embrace the technology when it first comes onto the market. Not the case here. Near enough, vast majority of people are going for it. However, only 11% of respondents say their organization has any kind of policy in place for the use of AI and how those projects might actually scale in reality. So there's huge excitement, enthusiasm, but we're in a position where no one really knows how this stuff is going to actually be implemented for the long term.
Does it also touch on whether these companies have an AI strategy as such? You know what I mean? Because there's two different approaches here. Like, yes, we're playing with AI. We have an active project, but it could be something that's kind of like, we're just seeing what we can do to push it, versus we've actually understood how AI is going to transform our business, and we have active pilots which are going to then determine that strategy more clearly.
We didn't ask that question directly, kind of reading between the lines of the responses. I think people have jumped into this with sort of 2 feet enthusiasm and an actual strategy around how these technologies will impact the organization long term is something that's definitely lacking. And that comes back to that 11% of respondents have any kind of use policies in place. 23% of respondents said their organization has implemented some kind of training. So you've got 80% of organizations doing something, but only 23% of organizations actually training their people on how to use it. So there's what you actually need in terms of the long-term follow-through just sort of seems to be lacking a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, let me sort of put the other counter position, because I've heard this said as well, which is that say like, well, why do I need an AI strategy? AI is just a tool. I have a software strategy, I have an IT strategy, whatever. I don't need an independent AI strategy. And I've heard that, argument as well. Which I kind of went, oh, yes, at the time. And it kind of made sense at the time. I think, in the discussions that we've had, I probably sit on the other side of the fence now. I've sort of probably come down on the idea that AI is different and needs a different strategic kind of approach. And I think I think I've reached that conclusion because it fundamentally is about typically either augmenting or replacing human functions. And therefore, for me, that's a different thing in a sense.
I half agree with you.
That'll do.
I think it's really important that your organization has a strategy related to technology and various different technologies. And I think it's really important that your organization takes into account how technology is changing. But I don't necessarily think you need to say we have an AI strategy necessarily, but AI should be part of your overall strategy.
Yeah,
so
I guess
it's a nuance.
Of course, I'm not suggesting that you would have a separate AI strategy from a technology strategy, but I think that having a sort of a sub division to your IT strategy, which looks at AI in a slightly different way, puts it in a slightly different balance. I don't know. I could probably be persuaded either way, but I think there is something that's different about it. And I think it's really just that kind of thing when it comes to prototyping, because once you start going down that road, if you're not already thinking about how that's developing and what's the logical conclusion of what you're doing, I guess that's kind of where I'm going with it, really. But
you've given me a great chance to plug something we do at Thetius, so I'm gonna jump on it.
Go for it.
If I may. So we have a framework that we call ADAPT within Thetius. And if you ever want one of our team to come and deliver a strategy workshop using this framework, then send us a message. That ADAPT stands for Assessment, Discovery, Alignment, Planning, and then Tracking. And it's designed to be technology agnostic, but assessment is understanding where the organization is at today. Real kind of warts and all look at everything. What's good, what doesn't work, what needs to be changed. Discovery is the really important bit, because that is the way you look 3 to 5 years ahead and you say, one, where is the organization going to go? What do we want the organization to be doing in that time? And then 2, where is the wider world going? And that's when you look at things like technology, regulation, how the market's moving. Bringing those 2 things together, anyone who's doing this well should be thinking about AI as part of that part of the process. And if you're not, then that possibly raises kind of wider questions. So that's why I kind of say you don't necessarily want to have separate strategies, but some people seem to do this. You have a marketing strategy, a technology strategy, and then they come up with an AI strategy and everything gets really confused. You should really have a single overarching strategy for your business, and all of those different facets should slot into it. And then alignment's about getting everyone around it. Planning is about building a plan, and then tracking is about how you actually track progress against it. So, but yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I just think you've got to take it in a wider set of context that includes more than just AI.
Yeah, I think it sort of reminds me a little bit of when cloud computing began.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
what's your cloud strategy?
Yes, it's part of your technology strategy, but there are fundamental things about making that commitment to cloud. There was a point at which you would need to have a strategy for how you would transform your business to think cloud and to go cloud and to be comfortable in that early adoption stage with the implications of moving from something which was very much under your control and very much kind of, the rules were very established to something that was going to be a bit of a leap of faith in some regards. So it's sort of similar to that, I think. And you wouldn't have a cloud strategy now because it's ubiquitous and it's, something that you're really comfortable with, in the same way that you wouldn't maybe have an AI strategy in 5 years because it would have settled down and you would, it would be part and parcel of how you were thinking technology wise anyway. So, but yeah, anyway, I mean, like I said, I could be persuaded either way. Now, one of the things that I did want to dig into was obviously, having been one myself, if you commission research from yourselves, and as a vendor, you mentioned Marcura requested this one. What was their sort of main interest, do you think, in kind of supporting the research?
I think possibly, I don't want to speak out of turn, but you can see it in the acquisitions they've made recently, in what they've done to their messaging over the last few months. And actually, Henrik, the CEO of Marcura, reached out to me yesterday. I haven't responded yet, but I think we should try and possibly look at having him come on the show to talk about this, because I think they've got quite an interesting story to tell in the transformation they're going through at the moment. But they are trying to become an AI first vendor in this space. And so I think that the research had 2 purposes. One was to help build an understanding of how people genuinely feel about AI. And then 2 was to go help build a kind of more of a practical roadmap around how do you go from that kind of, yes, we're doing sort of 80% of us are doing pilots. We're excited about the technology. We're enthusiastic about it, to actually getting to some level of scale. It's a big gulf. And in the report, we talk about the fact that the kind of AI market in Maritime is in something of a kind of pilot purgatory where there's loads and loads of pilots going on, but we don't really know how any of it's going to scale up yet. And that is the key question, both for a vendor and also for any ship owner, ship manager, charterer who wants to use this stuff.
Yeah, interesting.
There's a couple of the recommendations that I think are really interesting. And the big one, and I think you'll like this as a human element kind of person, the big one is that actually we noticed through both the interviews and the survey that we did, there's a huge, it's an emotionally charged, because I think there's a fear factor to it. People are sort of worried about job displacement, all of that sort of stuff. There is a level of sentimentality, I guess, about highly experienced people making decisions, humans making decisions. There's worry about how relationship driven the industry is and whether you lose some of that kind of human touch if you go too far with these kind of systems. And I think that's a really interesting thing that we often talk about change management in organizations when we look at how we're going to implement new technologies. We very rarely get to the point where it becomes, which we're trying to address a real kind of emotional block that someone might have at scale across an organization. And I think that's just the most, so the most interesting recommendation for me is Fiona that wrote the report says, actually, you need to tackle that bit head on. You need to actually engage with the, how people respond to this stuff emotionally and understand those fears and then take steps to actually help people to overcome them. And it's very rare that in Thetius research, we talk in depth about emotions. So I just quite enjoyed that.
I think that's really interesting. And that's one of the things that I think is so exciting about this as a debate, because it does the backdrop to it is thoughts around what it is to be a human. And what do we mean by human intuition and human creativity and passion? Are these things that can be broken down into binary and mimicked or even improved on by machines? And certainly you didn't have that factor when talking about some of these other big changes like cloud computing. Cloud computing wasn't an emotional subject. I guess it was for the IT guy who was kind of thinking about all these kind of fears and stuff, but to the average worker it didn't really mean that much, and it didn't spark that same debate. And I think this is the thing about AI that's different, is that we talked about it the other week, didn't we, about our relationships and how we talk to our GPTs and things like that. I mean, it's odd, but we do these things. We anthropomorphize these, if you can use that word for machines. But and there are some interesting things happening with AI as well. I don't know if you've seen some of those studies or trials that they've done where if the AI gets a sense that it's likely to be replaced or shut down, it will start to look for ways, a self-preservation instinct, and it will start to kind of trawl through emails and sort of find the boss that's having an affair so they can start to use that as leverage and things like that.
Is that right? I've not seen that.
Wow. You've not seen this. It's wargaming essentially that they're doing. Yeah, and the AI will picks up, access to the email and picks up that they're talking about replacing it. And it will, that self-preservation thing, as far as the AI goes, is certainly my interpretation of it, is it's not that it's been imbued with this kind of natural self-preservation, but it's imbued with lots of kind of motivation to complete task and to, to finish work and so on. And therefore it won't be able to complete those tasks if it's compromised in some way or prevented from access. And it's smart enough to know that it can it find leverage? Can it sort of, look to blackmail members of the team, which is, it's really scary. Which again makes it seem like it has a personality and it has some human qualities.
To just on the research, one of the really interesting things that came through was 37% of the respondents said they've witnessed AI projects failing or causing harm. So about a third of people have witnessed AI causing harm in some way in the organization.
So the research is published now and presumably downloadable from your website.
We'll put a link in the show notes, make it easy for people.
Good. And the webinar, is that recording available as well?
Yes. Oh, you're doing all the plugging for me. This is great. Yes, it'll go out probably by the time this is out, it will probably be out on YouTube. So if you go over to the Thetius YouTube channel or go onto our website, you'll be able to find it.
Very good. Very good. Moving on from that subject, last week we were debating whether or not a story would have gone live by the time it was published and therefore would have been all right to talk about it. It has gone live. It's a company that we've talked about a little bit before. I think they was already acquisition not that long ago as well, OrbitMI, a company that you work with, and they bought a, is it Galeforce? Did I remember that
Galeforce.
correctly?
Yeah, that's them. Yeah.
So talk me through that one, because you covered this in Digital Ship.
We did. Well, we got the exclusive in Digital Ship, so we were able to break the news, which is why I knew it was coming down the track. I just obviously couldn't talk about it publicly just yet. And we were fortunate enough to get to sit down with the CEO of OrbitMI and interview him for Digital Ship as well. Because it's interestingly, I think they've made two acquisitions on the trot just a few weeks apart. First we talked about before was Auqub, the agentic AI sort of acquihire. And then this second one is a very traditional maritime weather routing advisory business called Galeforce. So it's much, much more focused on human experts in the loop who are able to provide advisory services back to industry. And it felt like when we kind of first heard about it, we thought, well, that doesn't really make any sense, right? So you're buying an agentic, take the human out of the loop, automate stuff as much as possible, startup on the one hand, and then buying an established maritime advisory business on the other hand a few weeks later. And so we kind of had to put that question to Ali, the CEO, and he came up with a really interesting answer. And they are trying to platform product and service together so that they can meet a much wider group of customers kind of where they are at in their journey. So some ship owners are fully in for this stuff. They just want access to a platform. They can wire in all of their other systems to it, and they're very happy just cracking on. Some customers need to get access to a suite of individual products, and they need an easy way of doing that. And some customers are relatively unevolved in that journey, in that kind of digital journey, and they actually need access to a service. They need something that will be, the supplier will kind of do it with them rather than just providing the software. And so what they've done with these two acquisitions, as I understand it, is they've gone for a platform that allows them to do that highly automated work, bringing agentic AI capabilities into their kind of core platform. But they've also acquired this services business that allows them to take a much more hands-on approach with their clients, and it gives them the ability to do sort of everything in between. So I thought it was quite an interesting approach, and not really something I've seen at those kind of two extreme opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, I think that's interesting the way that he described it there, because I looked at it and I didn't think that it was that odd, and I'll tell you why. It's because I think that when you look at the AI businesses that are really likely to thrive, I think they are the ones that are today very dependent or add significant value by their experts, physical human experts that they have. And because really the AI has just got to train as a model, right? It's got to be able to leverage that sort of level of understanding. And I don't think we're quite there yet. But I think that it makes a lot of sense from a technology business. Maybe 3-4 years ago, it didn't make sense if you were a high margin digital business to take on businesses that had an advisory or a consultation arm to them, because it affects your margin and it takes you out of being a technology company so much more into a sort of service company, and it affects your valuation and your multiple and all that sort of stuff. So, but I think when you start to apply AI layers to things, I think you start to look at those sorts of businesses differently, and you start to say, well, if I can then bring technology really into that, and I can really take that expertise and amplify that expertise, then I think that sort of makes a lot of sense. And it also means that you have extremely qualified knowledge base that can verify the AI material. Because I see that when I look at a lot of what different startups are doing, a lot of them, as you would expect, are working with AI. But you're looking at it and you're like, that could be amazing if it's correct. If all that, and can you verify? And typically those people don't have a huge number of experts on staff because the business model doesn't support that. So it just undermines your confidence a little bit of saying, well, how do I know if that's really correct? And I'm going to have to bring a lot of verification into this. So for me, I looked at that very much on sort of on that level and just thought, this makes sense to me, that you pick up an agentic AI business and then you pick up some real kind of something that's really dependent on expertise. But
that's super interesting, because I guess in a traditional, in inverted quotes, SaaS business, once you've built the software, once you've built the feature, it will run reliably time and time again. The same inputs will create the same output every single time. And actually, that's not how AI works. And so you are right. That element of human expertise and human verification becomes significantly more important in an AI driven software business than in a traditional software business. And so that's an interesting distinction that I hadn't really kind of thought about, but you're absolutely right.
Well, and the bit that's exciting about it for me is that there's, as a SaaS vendor, there's always a limit to what you can do for your customer in terms of, you're
Right.
there, essentially you're providing tooling and you're
Yeah.
relying on the expertise of the customer to do the final piece, or to kind of strategize how that's going to fit in with their company and how they're going to use it. And I think we talked about this in a previous episode where, like, the success or failure often of a technology innovation is often down to the company that implements it and how good their team is. So I think that's the excitement with AI, is the ability to potentially for vendors to become much more kind of consultants and much more kind of making much more recommendations based on having many more inputs that are coming, ability to process those inputs and diagnose those inputs, without a heavy consultancy arm to the business, and then being able to then make recommendations and adjustments to the software that better support the business processes. I think there's a lot to be won there.
Yeah.
We'll see if that happens, if it's a trend that sort of emerges. But yeah, I thought the other thing that was interesting that you had, the interview that you had with him, he was talking about being more appreciative of each customer needing their own kind of solution. And I don't think anyone wants to go back to the bad old days of where, you had a version of a software and then all the customers had their own version of that software because it had been modified and tweaked. Because when you get into that world, it's then extremely difficult to support that client. The documentation becomes much more complicated. The support becomes much more complicated. Software does need to move forward, and it's much harder to do that if you've got all these people on different branches of the code base and stuff like that. So I don't think there's any appetite to go back to that, but there is this appreciation, I think, that it's not one size fits all, and customers are becoming increasingly interested in having something that really deals with the specifics of their trade and the way that they want to operate.
And the ability of those customers to build their own sort of point solutions now in-house. It doesn't necessarily take 18 months and a team of 15 software engineers to roll out highly customized feature now with the tools that you've got available. If you've got the right infrastructure in place, I should say, creating a point solution within an organization, can be done very quickly and very cheaply, and it doesn't require necessarily this huge long development cycle. And that's the big if all of those inputting integrations work. And I think that comes back to your point of, you say going back to the bad old days of that. That still exists. Sometimes we go into a shipping company and kind of look at the tech stack they're using, and they're on they're on a version that was 3 versions back because it had this one little customized plugin on it that is no longer supported. And they just aren't able to upgrade. And then they get frustrated that the system isn't performing as they would expect it to. So then they start to think, well, should we go out to other vendors? And often actually the first thing that we look at is, well, look, if you just found another way to solve that problem and then upgraded the system you have, that might be so much cheaper than trying to switch to an entirely new vendor, because you're not necessarily kind of maximizing what your existing vendor has. Huge change management problem.
Yeah. And I think so that's the implication, I think, to building out these kind of platforms that are designed to solve more and more and more of the customers' pain points, is that design at the heart, which accepts that sometimes people will have a very good reason for wanting to persist with an existing vendor in one of those slots, or a customized solution that they've made themselves in one of those slots. And it's how well then you're able to make the features that they want available to them and to connect with other players. And it's a very difficult thing, I think, for any vendor really, because obviously if look at Apple, for example, because they've been much more restrictive in terms of what you can do, and the people sort of wanting to augment it, it means that they can have a unified user experience. They can keep it very, very sort of tight from that point of view, versus the plurality of something like a Windows system where you've got lots of different, manufacturers and all that sort of stuff, which gives you much more freedom, but comes with some downsides as well. So I think it's a plight that's always been there for vendors. But I think, as we discussed previously, I think AI And the fact that you can create these kind of agents, you can create point solutions, as you called them there, or little mini apps that solve a specific business problem, all of that becoming much easier. I think that people are wanting to have that kind of flexibility and increasingly wanting to kind of broaden as they connect their world up. I think it shows up where they're not as generic as they might look if you're just providing a more limited set. Maybe everybody's, one function might look the same in 6-7 different trades and scales and sizes of operation. Once you start looking at the whole way that they operate and starting connecting that supply chain up, perhaps then it starts to become more of a challenge.
Just an interesting side point on integration and vendors that choose not to take a really open approach to integrating was we got a new car about 3 months ago, and we spent ages kind of looking around at various different models. We ended up getting the same car we had the previous time, just a newer version of it. But the instant number one thing that would rule a car out for me was if it didn't have Apple CarPlay.
Mm-hmm.
If it didn't have Apple CarPlay, I just wouldn't buy it. And I kind of sat there and thought afterwards, I wouldn't even test drive it. I wouldn't even look at it. And I kind of sat there and thought about it afterwards. Like the iPhone is £1,000 purchase, say, and a car is a £30,000 purchase. And yet my decision about which car I would buy, the much, much bigger purchase, was entirely driven by whether it would integrate with my iPhone or not. And I just thought it was a really interesting thing. That is I'm prioritizing one tiny bit of spend over this massive spend for a massive piece of machinery, entirely down to whether there is a good integration or not.
That's fascinating, because I'm actually looking for a new car as well.
Oh, are you?
I have had a similar thought process.
Because most car software is just terrible, and car manufacturers are just bad at making software. But CarPlay's great.
I actually ruled out, this is like confessions, isn't it, time? But I actually ruled out one very good and highly performant car because I didn't like the fonts on the electronic dashboard.
Okay, I mean, that's very much a you thing.
What an absurd person I am that I've become. But aesthetics are important, and it's like it's because it's such an expensive thing, a car.
Yeah.
I think it's that idea that every time you got in there and you used whatever they have that's not, instead of CarPlay, whilst you know that CarPlay is like, works really well, and that's the thing that you're staring at a lot of the time when you're actually in the car. I think it's partly that, it's like that sort of, it's the thing that's going to drive you mad about this hugely expensive thing that you've bought.
Yeah.
So it's sort of,
and it's the same with a ship. I imagine I've never bought a ship, but I imagine it's the same with a ship.
I'm not sure even the most capricious ship owner would decline on the basis of fonts and graphic
that might
design.
be taking it a bit far.
But, or they wouldn't be in business for very long if they took my approach. But it's funny, it's funny. But this is the interesting thing, I think, about about the sort of usability and user experience and stuff like that. It's on that really emotional level, and that will always trump a more kind of cerebral decision. That's just because you'll just have that natural aversion to it. So I think to make you feel slightly better, a lot of people have spent a huge amount of money to buy that kind of loyalty and to engender that loyalty to you in the fact that you really like that product.
Although one thing on that is different between making a consumer purchase and a business purchase. So often we see that the end users want one particular product because of really good UX, UI. They really like the look and feel of it. And then a decision maker up in an ivory tower goes for something else based purely on a very intellectual business case, nothing else. And you just see how upset everyone through the rest of the organization gets because they didn't get the one that they wanted. Also,
I noticed you raised another story, which I read with some interest. And we talk quite often about cybersecurity and vulnerabilities, that kind of thing. There was a big story on that this week as well.
Yeah, a couple of days ago, a hacker group called Sewn Lips claimed responsibility for one of the largest cyber attacks on Iran's shipping industry. So they took around 60 Iranian tankers and cargo ships offline. The way that they did it was that they gained access to their SATCOM supplier, their IT and SATCOM supplier, company called Fanava Group, who are an Iranian IT and telecoms company. So they provide all of the SATCOMs for the fleet, data storage for the fleet, and also a whole bunch of payment systems for the fleet. What they managed to do was get root level access to the Linux systems running the SATCOMs terminals on the ships. And because of that, they were basically just able to just switch the SATCOMs off. And that meant overnight, 60 ships just went offline.
No IAS or any sort of safety critical information, basically.
Really, really interesting, right? Because I think people underestimate how integrated ships have become. And I would ordinarily think AIS would work even if you took the SATCOMs out. I've seen all sorts of stories where if you take one system down, you take the SATCOMs down, or you possibly just take the GPS down, all of the other systems start to fall over as well because they rely on each other and are very heavily integrated. And so I think that it speaks to a kind of a wider question around if you have a vulnerability with just the SATCOMs, for example, what are the other systems on board the ship that can be taken out? And actually, potentially, that's quite a lot.
Yeah, so I noticed, the reason I mentioned AIS there was I think I read it in the story, and it did strike me as slightly odd, and I just wondered whether the way that was configured, but was that actually down to that root level access and there not being the sufficient break between their IT and OT, sorry, yeah. Do you happen to know that
I don't have enough inside knowledge on that, but I do. We have seen there was a really interesting experiment done by Trinity House about 5 years ago, where they took one of their ships out into the North Sea and basically just started blocking various systems to see what happened to the rest of the systems on board. And exactly what you're talking about was a major issue. Unless the network segregation is very, very good, you can put yourself in a very precarious situation by knocking out one system just has a domino effect. The radar goes, the ECDIS goes, a whole load of different systems on board can go if you're not set up correctly.
I think it was good what you mentioned there with Trinity House, because we've talked about it before, whether, these kind of drills of sort of, almost like a kind of a IoT blackout, from a cyber attack and getting used to those sorts of drills of how do you kind of then maintain safety and all those sort of things when all your normal routes of communication are down, and how are you going to kind of, do that? I think it's a good idea, and I think it will gain increasing advocacy, I think, because it's one of the big risks out there.
You've got some stuff coming up at LOSW, right?
Well, yeah.
You wanted to talk about.
Well, London International Shipping Week is sort of, it's growing arms and legs for me. I seem to be kind of doing more and more. It's becoming a busier and busier week, which I'm not complaining about. It's a home game, as it were. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago. You talked about you've got a Thetius event. We've got a clash, haven't we? Because you've got your event on the Tuesday afternoon. Your top 150, is it launch? I think it is.
Correct. Yeah, we're launching the Thetius Top 150 on the Tuesday afternoon. But I think that's nearly full, actually.
And I'm also on the Tuesday afternoon doing at the Immerset offices Strictly Decarb, which is a different look at the different levers that we have to get us to 2050. So not talking about fuels and all the infrastructure that's needed and all that sort of stuff, just really kind of practical things around what hardware, operational excellence and business models that can all be utilized to kind of get us to 2050. So we talked about that. And also as well, on the Thursday, you and I are both moderating sessions at the ISSS. And someone said to me, what's the ISSS stand for? And I was like, International Ship Ownership Management Summit. I think that's correct.
That's 3 S's, yeah.
But it's, owners and managers. It's a very good lineup. There's some fantastic sort of companies and individuals involved in that one, giving keynotes. I'm doing a session I found out just recently, which I'm looking forward to, which is all about sort of readiness for the transformation that we're going through. So very broad, looking at that. So that's something that I'm busy putting together. You're doing the AI, and is it purely AI or is it AI and technology one?
I'm doing something on digitalization and AI. So is shipping agile enough to embrace the opportunities that come with AI? So we've got some really interesting technologists on a panel who are all looking at this from slightly different angles. We've got covering the kind of connectivity angle, the software angle, and then also the kind of the risk angle as well. So I think it should be a really, really fun session.
There's not that many events where in the global calendar where you have the really senior
Yeah.
people talking. And it's always really interesting to get their perspectives, because they are the ones that are actually shaping the agenda for everybody, you know. So hearing the things that they naturally gravitate to, something that's a top of mind for them as far as a concern goes, and it can be really quite illuminating. But yeah, there's no point plugging that one because it's already sold out. So, and I think it's oversubscribed. So if your name's not down, you're not coming in. Sorry about that. But we will do something. We will do a little correspondence from there. So if you're not there, we will do an undocked take on that one. So you can, you'll know all the major topics. But the one thing I was going to do, I'm involved in, I'm moderating a session on that one. I'm sort of facilitating. I'm the kind of, Bruce Forsyth of the Strictly Decarb event on the Tuesday. I'm also involved, possibly speaking, I've put myself on the reserve list, but I've been helping to put together something on, which is on the Thursday afternoon at 2:00. And it's about understanding isolation at sea. So broadly speaking, it's a sort of seafarer welfare. I've been helping to put this event together. And I think it's a really interesting topic because it speaks to a few different things. Clearly on a vessel, you've got that physical isolation, okay, being away from your family, your support networks and stuff like that. But then there's also the idea that loneliness isn't just about being alone, that thing about being alone in a crowd, and sort of whether you have that sort of emotional, psychological connection to the people that you're actually with. And if you don't, you can be alone in a crowd sort of thing. And then there's the sort of third dimension of kind of digital isolation. And what do I mean by that? I mean, like, there's the separation between your loved ones, which of course, digital can potentially sort of help to remedy. But there's this idea that's playing on my mind of the importance of your digital self and your digital profile and your ability to be at large in the digital realm, if that makes sense.
Interesting.
And I'll give you a really simple illustration I think is really interesting, and why I think this is a kind of a generational and societal shift. When I started in this business years ago, I remember talking to a chap who had been at sea and now come ashore, getting towards retirement age. And I was talking to him about what he missed about being at sea. And he said the thing that he really missed about being a life at sea was the complete separation from what was going on.
Yeah.
Not having any news, he loved,
Yeah.
He loved the quiet of it. He loved like not knowing what was going on in the world, and that peace that came from isolation. And if you contrast that to like talking to a seafarer, today, what don't you like about life at sea? They would almost certainly point to that disconnection and that not knowing what's going on and not being up to the minute and not being involved. And I think that there's something about that these days, that it's become so important to be part of that digital world and part of that digital community, that not being able to participate in that would be sort of a sense of being deprived. But there are sort of a number of other things that are contributing to the feelings of isolation, and perhaps we can get into them. But I think that fundamentally it's those three kind of things that are the biggest factors for me.
Two reflections on that from me. One was that when I went on holiday a few weeks ago, back in July, and on the first day of the holiday, I deleted basically every app that kept me in touch with the wider world. So I deleted all my work apps off my phone, kind of email and Slack and all that sort of stuff. But I also deleted BBC News and I deleted the Times. And I realized 5 days later how much happier and less anxious I was. And interestingly, I came back off holiday and I didn't re-download them. And I now don't read the news every day. I cancelled my Times subscription. And I was going on those news apps, multiple times a day. I don't know, probably 4, 5, 6 times a day. I didn't realize what an impact it was having on my mood. Things that I have zero control over, Russia, Ukraine, and what's going on in the Middle East. And there's literally nothing I can do about it. And so it sort of became what's the point in having it there in your face 24 hours a day? I still find out about the important things happening in the world because people talk about it, or possibly I watch the news once a day in the evening on the telly instead of having it there with me 24 hours a day. So I definitely recognize an element of that. Actually, there is an element of positivity when you're isolated from things that you have no control over that cause you anxiety or problems. And then the second thing was it kind of got reflecting on, which is a buzzword. It got me reflecting on a buzzword that we haven't used for some time. The last probably 2 or 3 years, it's kind of fallen out of fashion a little bit, but the metaverse. And people would talk about the metaverse like we were all going to start wearing VR goggles and, meet up virtually in some kind of virtual world. But I kind of think of it less as a place and more as a kind of point in time where your life online matters more than your life offline. And I think about my work. I generally work remotely. I go in to our kind of HQ in Horsham about twice a month, 2 or 3 times a month. You and I met face to face in Oslo, had the idea for this podcast and launched this podcast. And we're now on our 10th episode and we haven't met face to face again since. It entirely happens digitally and it entirely happens online. And so I just think it's a really interesting point where I feel like if I strip the internet back from my day-to-day work, I would lose my income. I would lose a lot of my social connections. And so it feels like we have kind of crossed the Rubicon a little bit in that our life is primarily lived online, with some exceptions where I think you also get kind of bombarded by things that you have no control over, that it's healthy to cut those things out, but you have to face the reality of where society's moving. And that is to a metaverse, if you like, where we are primarily, we're more online than we are offline.
Yeah. And people spend an enormous amount of time managing that online personality.
Yeah.
People are invested in projecting the best version of themselves and to try and kind of curate posts and I won't say mislead necessarily, but certainly project an image that they have thought about and that they have crafted and that is imbibed by people they have never met physically, and that they're invested in how those people feel about them. And I think perhaps we've gravitated to sort of, the smallest part of, certainly when you talk about seafarer isolation, this isn't the thing that people are really talking about. They're talking about reduced shore leave and port access. They're talking about, a lack of connectivity to be able to call home and those kind of things. They're talking about smaller crew sizes, and automation will make that even worse. Multinational crews is obviously a massive, massive part of it as well, in terms of, your ability to kind of have the level of conversation that you might need to have to open up to someone and to have a more in-depth ones. And also, lengthy contracts that are going on. So I think not to discredit any of that side of it, but I think that it's right that we gravitate to this as a topic, because this is about the way in which technology is transforming expectations and is transforming the way in which people are operating. And I think if you've built up online collateral, let's say, real estate, number of followers, and you're getting dopamine from the likes and stuff that you have and so on, there is genuine loss there if those things are denied to you and you're not able to keep that up and you see your follower count go down or whatever, And there are, Carl King, we both know Carl does a fantastic job of kind of seafarer social and stuff like that. It blew my mind when he talked to me about like the sea influencers and these huge followings that these people have and the amount of content. There's a lot of really great stuff that happens on there, but that also, seafarers are people, right? They like the same things as the rest of humanity, and of course they're going to want to be playing their part in that metaverse that you described there. So I think it's an aspect of it that isn't really thought about. And of course, you mentioned there about the anxiety, and this is one of the things that I think is also interesting in the whole connectivity debate. And that's that thing about, I guess it's the double-edged sword of connectivity. You're bringing home on board the ship, but you're also bringing the problems of home on board the ship, but you're lacking that agency to be able to really do anything about it. A guy, I remember a seafarer explaining it to me, and sort of saying in the old days, you'd get 3 letters, and the first one would say, little Johnny's broken his arm, and the next someone would say, he's feeling much better now. You know what I mean? You'd you'd get a complete story. Whereas if you were getting live updates, he's just had a fall in the park, he's come off his bike, what's going on? And you're there, you've got that anxiety, you've got no agency to kind of do anything about it sort of in real time. So I think it's kind of like I think the key takeaway for me in a lot of this debate is about acknowledging these things. And I've spoke to some companies who would actually actively manage this with relatives.
Yeah.
They would actually they had good touch points with the seafarers' families, and they were able to describe to them, what's a really optimum way to be engaging, getting them to remember that someone might have just come off watch or might be about to go on watch very soon, and that they should be careful about how they frame things and that kind of thing, which I think is very, very sensible to look at that. But it does occur to me that, that thing about isolation that we've talked about there is interesting with that convergence with shore. In the old days, you'd have people working in a community on the ship, and you'd have people working in an office community on shore. Increasingly, where you mentioned we don't meet up physically, increasingly work is being done remotely. And I'm quite sure that the isolation is not just a problem at sea, although of course it's a very different problem, but alienation is something that we're experiencing at shore as well.
It's an interesting one, because I feel, so I last went to sea 10 years ago as a member of crew anyway, and I'm only in my mid-50s, but I already feel a bit out of touch, and a bit like one of the old boys who used to say, back in my day. But back in my day, the emails were checked once a day. We would go and we had a single email account for all of the crew. It was all shared, and there was a sort of gentleman's agreement that we wouldn't check each other's emails. If it had your name on it, only you could open it. But anyone could look at anyone else's emails if they wanted to. And I don't remember feeling particularly isolated. Weirdly, I felt more isolated on coastal ships that I worked on, where I had relatively good internet access, because you could see what was going on in the world around you, ashore, what your friends were doing, weddings, all of that sort of stuff that you're missing out on by being at sea. Whereas when you're totally isolated from it, and as you say, you get the kind of updates intermittently, it does create I think you put a lot more time, energy and effort into those who you are physically present with. We've gone well past the point where you can make the argument that possibly based on that, crew just shouldn't have access to the internet. That's ridiculous. And I think that's a ship has sailed, to use a maritime pun. But I think your point around how it's managed and how you manage family expectations about, or loved one expectations about how they should be in touch with people, I think that's really, really important. My uncle passed away when I was at sea, and I was in the middle of the Indian Ocean and wasn't getting off for another 3 months. And so I missed the funeral, all that sort of stuff. On reflection, I think I probably would rather have not known. But obviously my family told me, I got sort of daily updates on his progress. Yeah, it's a really hard thing to deal with when you're kind of dealing with it completely on your own. And I think as a young man going and talking to other men on the ship about that kind of thing happening, is quite a difficult thing to do. And so I think there's a huge amount of work that can be done or should be done to help family know how to interact with someone positively who is isolated from them. And also that on board, you've got the right kind of support set up, that when that kind of stuff does happen, and it's inevitable that it will, that people know where to go to speak to someone, or people know how to go about approaching those kind of topics. If you see that someone is looks like they may have had a bit of bad news, that sort of stuff. And I think that's something that we definitely miss as an industry today, and will become more important as ships get better connectivity.
It's really interesting hearing your story there. And I think it illustrates really, really well, the good intentions all round. Of course, if you get in touch, you've got to tell someone. You can't have them say, why didn't you tell me? Right. But what does that mean? I think that the other point I want to say there about support networks, that is something that people point to as the solution, or one of the solutions there. But I think we're loading up seafarers with an increasing number of things that they've got to be good at. Like we've added, digital literacy in the means, now emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
I think it's something that it's a luck of the draw, whether you get somebody on board a ship who can play that role, who can be that, has that emotional intelligence to spot, and to help someone and talk someone through it. And I mentioned it before, the multinational cruise thing, multinational setups are great. It's one of the things that I love about the shipping industry, that we have all these different cultural influences and stuff like that. But if you've also got language difficulties there, it's one thing having a working knowledge of the vessel and being able to communicate on the things that are important for safety and for running the operations? Do you have the kind of language skills that would enable and facilitate these kind of discussions around well-being and mental health and things like that? That requires a different kind of vocabulary, and to try and do that stuff well in your own language with someone can be very, very challenging. Trying to do that in a second language or having that barrier, it's not an easy thing to do. But I think that increasingly, I think that it's one of the most undervalued things across the board, at board level, at C-suite level, emotional intelligence. And this speaks to the diversity argument. Emotional intelligence is one of those things that should be valued and should be present on any team, because you've got to be able to think about that human dimension for your technology to work for you, for your business outcomes to be achieved. It's not just about being a nice person. This is about the fundamentals of having a really working business where people are able to concentrate and do the job that you want them to do and do it well.
It's also something that's really difficult to train. I think we all kind of roll our eyes and groan a little bit when we're told we're going to have to do emotional intelligence training and all that sort of stuff. And that's because some people are naturally more predisposed to having those, wanting and being interested in those kind of conversations, and some people are not. Some people will choose to avoid those kind of conversations. And so I think that actually comes all the way back to a recruitment question, and it's not necessarily or not exclusively a question of kind of training that stuff into people.
Yeah. And that's about, like, this is one of the things that I used to hammer home when I'd be talking to people about recruitment and potential recruitment tools, things like personality profiling, ability profiling. This is not just about, is the individual able to pass muster or pass some predefined view of what we're looking for. It's about building teams. So if you know what people's natural instinctive reaction to things is going to be, you can't change people's personality fundamentally. And like you said, building those kind of emotional intelligence as a skill is a difficult thing to build. But I think that if you can help people to understand where they are, what their natural reaction to things is, it can sort of temper perhaps some of their behavior and allow them to be aware of how they might be perceived, and to be able to kind of get to a better place. And having the right mix of people is also really about strength, and getting that sort of a bit of diversity in your team so that you've got different people who can play different roles and build that kind of community that you want to build on board. I think that increasingly sensible approach, and data can be very, very helpful in that regard as well, in being able to sort of see, when you're planning your crew changes, when you're planning how you're going to kind of set up your top four and all that kind of stuff, having data like that available to you, having feedback on individuals available to you to be able to do that would be a really interesting kind of approach for anyone in crewing to take.
One of my favorite things I've ever heard from a crewing leader was in a Thetius interview. So I can't say who said it because they run anonymously, but I think actually it was possibly in the work we were doing with you a couple of years ago. The issue was raised about multicultural crews, and how you overcome kind of questions around multicultural crews, all of that sort of stuff. And he said, well, I need to stop you there. We don't have multicultural crews. We have multinational crews. We have one culture as an organization. And I thought that was just such a great answer, and spoke so clearly to how deliberately they engender culture within the organization. If you get the culture right and you reward the right behaviors and you don't tolerate the wrong behaviors, all of that stuff naturally starts to come together, regardless of country of origin and all of those other questions. And so I just thought that's such a great way to think about it when you're thinking about how you bring a team together, whether that's on a ship or in the wider industry.
It doesn't happen by accident.
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned behaviors there, and I think that's one of the best descriptions of culture I've ever heard, which is that your culture is the behaviors that you tolerate.
Yeah. I think that's a perfect summary.
Yeah. Good. So, I think you had an and finally, didn't you?
I've actually got a couple. One I'd be interested just to get your immediate response to. Have you heard of Marine Media Enterprises?
Yes, I have. Yeah. My old mate, Stephen Bond.
Exactly.
Founder of Videotel. Yes, I know them very well.
Yeah, Stephen and Lula Bond are back. They have created a donate and train initiative. So it's partly seafarer training and part charitable giving. But I just thought it was quite a nice initiative. And then obviously you will have worked with them. So I thought I'd raise that quickly just to get your reaction to it.
Yeah. I see Stephen periodically and Lula. And yeah, I think what they're doing is really, really interesting. I mean, clearly Stephen is someone that's been, celebrated in the industry and recognized for the contribution that he made to sort of, seafarer safety, and really the kind of father of maritime e-learning. I think when he started, I don't think it was even an e-learning industry, let alone maritime e-learning. So huge respect for the contribution that he's made, and I certainly learned a huge amount from working with him. And so yeah, this is something that, having sold the Videotel business back in 2015, I'm going to say, something like that. He's kind of still very keen to be actively involved in the industry and give something a little bit back. So particularly interested from the sort of seafarer and the welfare perspective. So a lot of what they'll be doing is working on some topics. I think they actually covered isolation, actually being one of the topics there. But also I find them interesting from the point of view that, again, it's coming at it from that culture perspective. They're doing a lot of work for individual companies that are coming with something specific that they want to work with, like just culture, implementing just culture. And then those become part of a library which are useful then to other people as well. So it's not like they're doing necessarily bespoke work, but it's coming sort of from that customer base as being typically things that they're really looking to spearhead and to sort of work within their organizations as well. I know there's a big charity sort of element to there in terms of how it works and stuff, but I'm afraid I can't remember the mechanics.
It's 25%. So they've pitched it as less than a cup of coffee per vessel per day to get access to this platform of training content. And 25% of the fee is donated to a charity of choice chosen by the subscribing company. So it's quite a nice way of both improving training, but then also kind of enhancing the kind of ESG side of things. And I can imagine a lot of the seafaring charities will benefit from that.
Yes, it will be. I should have brought it up, really. Stephen will kick my bum for that.
Right, now I'll do my final and finally. Have you heard of macro hard?
Am I going? No, I've definitely never heard of macro hard. No,
it's a strong denial there. Elon Musk has come out with a new company, and he says he wants to create a competitor to Microsoft. See what he did there? Microsoft, macro hard. So the whole company is a troll.
He's clearly, like an intelligent man, like this Elon Musk. Clearly, you don't get to be the world's richest man without having some smarts. But what this guy knows about branding, I mean, like, he's like the antichrist of all brand. He's just like comes up with terrible, unworkable names like Twitter, like a household name, and he rebrands it X, something that's kind of completely and utterly awful with a dreadful. I mean, I talked about hating the fonts on that car. That every time I see that Twitter X, it gives me kind of palpitations, makes me ill. And then it just kind of, to do something such a clumsy, horrible pun with a macro hard, like, yeah. I mean, I'm not going to.
I thought you'd enjoy that.
He's probably going to deny me access to Starlink now. He's very thin-skinned. But
in fairness, before he trashed it by getting into politics, he did build one of the most valuable brands in the world in Tesla. Who did no advertising but were consistently selling more, selling out of their cars. Mm. So I think he has something to him, and I definitely wouldn't bet against him. But what he's trying to do is he's saying that all of the software that Microsoft builds, he believes that AI will be able to simulate. So he's creating an AI-only software company that is going to write software from scratch to compete with Microsoft. And just to make sure it's really obvious he's competing with Microsoft, he's calling it macro hard.
And is his motivation here purely because Bill Gates does altruistic? Is it sort of like, are there too much diversity or something in Microsoft? Is that kind of where this is coming from?
No, I think it's probably closer to his beef with Sam Altman. So obviously Elon Musk was a co-founder of OpenAI.
Yes.
Recently, in the last 6 months or so, tried to sue OpenAI for all sorts of things. One, going from a non-profit to a profit-based model, and then two, ripping huge amounts of data off X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it. And so they have had this sort of ongoing public spat for the last 12 months. I think his thinking is, which I don't think is wrong, is that OpenAI is going to eat Microsoft in time. He's creating the AI alternative to whatever that behemoth will end up becoming. So I actually think, putting the branding to one side, I actually think it's a genuinely interesting play. And given that he accidentally transformed the maritime industry without sort of even trying to, really, I think we should definitely keep an eye on it.
Well, if he manages to kill off Microsoft Teams, I will certainly be indebted to him.
Very good point. Although I really don't want to go on macro hard Teams.
No, I don't think I could. I don't think I could get on with being macro hard. I don't think that's for me.
On that note,
yeah,
should we call
don't
it?
say
Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye. See you next time.